Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining Jinsa's regular weekly update on Israel's war in Gaza. I'm Blaise Mishal, Jinsa's Vice President for Policy. Delighted to be joined by two colleagues, a slightly different rotation than we usually have. Pleased to be joined by General Yaakov Aish, who was, I guess, just today named as the Julian and Jenny Josephson Senior Vice President for Israeli Affairs here at JINSA. So congratulations to General Aish, and thank you to him for all the work he does and for joining us here at JINSA. And of course, my senior fellow, the Charles and Randy Wax Senior Fellow, John Hanna. Thanks, John, for joining us. This has been a eventful week and a tragic one in operations in Gaza, and I wanted to begin by talking about that with General Aish, but also one where we've seen lots of possible developments and attempts to either bring a ceasefire to the conflict or reach some sort of deal for hostage negotiations, different ideas being floated by different parties. And so I wanted to also bring in John to talk a little bit about that from the American perspective, give us a sense of perhaps where the U.S.'s thinking is on what it's trying to accomplish as we've now passed well more than 100 days of fighting. So General Aish, let me begin with you. We saw this week the single deadliest day for IDF troops fighting in Gaza during this operation. 21 IDF troops killed in a single attack, 24 in a single day. It's a very tragic event, and our condolences could go out to their families and to all of Israel. But could you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Well, thank you, Blaise, for the kind introduction. Yes, it was a pretty tough week. We had this unfortunate incident, which in a second I'll explain what they were doing, but we lost 24 soldiers. The majority are from an infantry unit, and two of them are from an armored unit, reservist. They were carrying a mission to clear up the perimeter that is about to secure the villages and the different kibbutzim and moshavim along the Israeli border with Gaza as part of preparation to the future. And they have found and build-up area that was used by Hamas. And after they killed the terrorists, not all of them, they decided to blow it up. And for that sake, they brought in a lot of explosives. And once they have loaded all the explosives into this house, two terrorists with the RPGs launched one at the house that blew everything up, including 21 soldiers that were inside. In fact, there were 22, but 21 were killed. The second RPG was launched towards the tank, hitting the commander and the loader who is near him at the turret, and killed both of them. These are 24 Israeli soldiers out of 556 soldiers that were killed since October 7th. We tend to count the number since the beginning of the maneuver, but since the beginning of this war, we lost 556 IDF soldiers. It was part of the next phase conducted by the IDF inside Gaza. In fact, 2 days ago, a wide ground offensive started by a paratroopers division together with some other brigades on the area of the refugees camps near Khan Yunis, part of the wide effort to clear up Khan Yunis. It is a phase started after an air attack and the forces have moved inside after they have secured the Khan Yunis refugee camp and started to clear up above ground and the build-up areas. There are two um, battalions of Hamas that were left in that area, not full battalions, not really acting as battalions. They are usually active as guerrilla fighters out of the hatches, out of the tunnels, or out of the buildings. And they started to fight over there. And they have killed more than 120 Hamas terrorists in the last 4 days at that area. It is part of the general effort to finish the mission mainly above and under the ground in the area of Khan Yunis, not just to clear it up, but at the end to demolish the military infrastructure that Hamas built under the ground. And if there are hostages or any other elements that can help us to find the hostages or clues to retrieve those as well. The challenge in that area is mainly the Nasser Hospital, which is the equivalent to the Shifa hospital. And we know already that many Hamas terrorists are already hiding inside the Nasser hospital, which is quite a big hospital, together with some others which are hospitalized over there. Some of the tunnels were already identified, surveyed, and demolished. We blew them up. There are many more. We are talking about more than 200 kilometers under the ground only in that area. And we know that it's a matter of weeks to clear it up from Hamas, and at the end to blow up the military infrastructure. We are very sensitive to the trap that the hospital could be for the IDF forces in many terms, not only in terms of survivability, but also in terms of legitimacy and the international community. And that's why the forces are acting very carefully in that area, but they are very decisive to achieve that mission. The forces that are active over there are still with the full air support, with the ISA support and the intelligence support. And as I started to describe at the beginning, while we are doing that, we are securing the other areas, plus clearing up the perimeter that is going to allow us in the future to have better conditions to secure the borders. Blaze, 111 days of war, and it seems like there is a lot to do, and maybe later I'll be able to speak about the challenge of Rafah, because this is something that we didn't deal with it yet. We have to cut the oxygen line, the supply lines for Hamas from Rafah. I mean, I'm not talking about humanitarian support. Obviously, I'm talking only about munitions and some other stuff that they can bring into Gaza via the tunnels from Egypt. It seems like there are still few active tunnels from Egypt into Rafah, into Gaza that are used by Hamas, and it's still an operational challenge to clear it up. As I told you, at the end of the day, it seems like we are in a phase of accumulating quite a lot of achievements, mainly killing a lot of terrorists, but not yet seeing any signs of, the other side is broken or losing the will to fight. They are still fighting, and that's why it seems like we have still a lot to do in that area.
Yes, to that point, General Eich, let me ask you, there was a report in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week saying that American estimates are that only about 20 to maybe 30% of Hamas fighters have been killed so far in the war, and therefore the implication being that a significant portion of Hamas's force is still ready to fight. Does that track with Israel's estimates of
Uh,
Hamas's strength at this point?
Our estimate is higher. I'm not sure on what the Wall Street Journal, which is a respected outlet, is talking about, but the numbers that I'm familiar with from the IDF are significantly higher. In terms of terrorists that were killed, we are talking about more than 10,000. And usually when you are talking about such an amount, the number of injured terrorists will be doubled. And if we are talking about 20 to 25,000 Hamas militants or terrorists, it seems like we are around 50 to 60%. Having said that, it's not enough. Definitely, we'll have to achieve few other elements if we want to achieve the strategic goal of eliminating Hamas as a fighting entity and as a ruling force inside Gaza. And for that sake, we have to eliminate their leadership, not only the military leadership, but also Sinwar and the others. We have to eliminate their command control capabilities. We have to eliminate their military infrastructure under and above ground, plus their military capabilities and their ability, the administrative capability, which is allowing them really to, I would say, administrate and to manage what is going on in Gaza when it comes to food, supply, humanitarian support. They are still the force that are controlling this stuff, and it seems like there are those who are behind the black market behind it, but in terms of control, it seems like they still have the control. We will have to eliminate the rest of the terrorists that are active over there, to seize their weapons and to demolish the infrastructure. And only by creating an accumulative impact, we will achieve the strategic goal. And as I mentioned, it's not only in Khan Yunis, although Khan Yunis is kind of a center of gravity, it's also the area of Rafah and the supply lines from Egypt into Gaza.
Uh, the point about the administrative control is a fascinating one, General Aish. Could you tell us a little more about how Hamas is managing to maintain that control amid the Israeli offensive, and what are the options for Israel to try to break down that control? Because I imagine it's not guys in Hamas uniforms with guns controlling things. So how can you go after those mechanisms and the personnel who are in control?
In terms of the operational level, there are three elements behind it. First of all is the effective command control capabilities, allowing Hamas tactical leadership to guide those militants, to go in and out to the area of Rafah and to escort the humanitarian supply, and later on to gain control on that supply. And when they are instructed also to sell it or to provide it or to deal with it according to their benefits and the policy. So this is the first element, the command control. The second one is the almost undisturbed presence inside the Rafah. Bear in mind that we are not yet in Rafah area. When you are talking about humanitarian supply, it comes in to the Gaza Strip via the Rafah passage from Egypt. So quite easily with small arms, they can take control on the lorries, on the trucks that are coming into Gaza, and later on to decide what they are going to do with that. So the fact that we don't have an effective military control in Rafah, it allows them to be present over there. And from there, which is the third phase, to take it in to the Muwasi, which is the area where most of the refugees are concentrated in a quite a secure area, which, by the way, they have used lately to launch rockets towards Israel, and we didn't retaliate towards it. Um, the, the, the ability to have and to exercise control over there via the humanitarian supply, plus small arms, threats, etc., is not too far. This is part of their ability to exercise control. And in many other areas, bear in mind that they have had, civilian authority presence and kind of a policing capability which they can use in order to enforce their will on the population as we saw it.
Blaise, can I just jump in quick and add maybe a fourth element, which is unfortunate, but I think the dominant distribution mechanism in Gaza for humanitarian aid and services remains UNRWA. And UNRWA's staff, unfortunately, or fortunately, I mean, is dominated. They employ an awful lot of local Gazans, but unfortunately, a very high percentage, probably, with a lot of sympathies and direct connections to Hamas. And unfortunately, the international community, because of its failure over time to do anything about the UNRWA problem, particularly inside of Gaza, but in the West Bank as well, we've become so dependent on them that in this current phase, we continue to use UNRWA, which is up to its eyeballs in collusion at some level with Hamas.
Definitely.
Thanks, John. And I guess, General Aish, following up on that point and getting to your earlier point about Rafah, what are the operational options for Israel to clean that up? I mean, is it purely pushing south from Khan Yunis into Rafah? Is there going to be need for some sort of cooperation or agreement from Egypt to close off the tunnels from its side? How do you reestablish security when you do have those tunnels that are still open?
Now, we know from past experience that there are three options. The first option is, to go into Rafah and to gain control on the Philadelphia axis, and from there to block the tunnels after detecting them, as we did in the early years of 2002-3, before the disengagement. Second option is via the diplomatic channel, to encourage the Egyptians to do what they did when Sisi took power, and he decided to fight and to demolish most of the tunnels under the Philadelphia axis, and he used very severe measures against the Egyptian population with very clear sanctions against those who are going to help or to use tunnels to smuggle arms from Egypt into Gaza. This is the second diplomatic channel. The third option, for those who are familiar with the map, is really to cut the supply lines, not on the Philadelphia axis, but between Khan Yunis and Rafah, literally to avoid Rafah and to create a block that practically separates Rafah towards the south, towards the Egyptian side, and divided from the north part, which is Khan Yunis. This is another operational option. So at the end of the day, every option has its own advantages and disadvantages, and it's subjected, to what do you want to achieve. The general idea of cutting the lines of supply will be achieved by each and every one of them to a certain degree and efficacy.
Is the third option, General, if I understood you correctly, to extend the security perimeter that Israel wants to build along the border between Israel and Gaza, to extend that to cut the southern part of Gaza off
That's basically it. But instead of extending it just from north to south to defend the villages along the border, it is also an extension of that perimeter from east to the sea, to the west, to divide the area of Khan Yunis from the area of Rafah, and by that, really controlling what is moving on from south to north.
Hmm. And can you tell us a little more about Israel's vision for that security perimeter and sort of what its
Okay,
status is?
it's not yet clear. It relates to some other strategic considerations because every stage, every phase or operational idea which I've mentioned has its own implications in terms of time, legitimacy, resources that are going to be invested, and so on and so forth. And obviously has its own, I would say, consequences and implications. So at the end of the day, all of those have to be weighed according to the strategic goal. And I didn't mention, all about nothing about the I would say strategic and international envelope and influence on that. However, it is something that have to be considered by the political level and then by the form that the IDF is applying the maneuver to that extent.
I guess speaking of strategy, General Eich wanted to shift a bit to talking about the question of the hostages, which has, I think, played a prominent role over the last week. And if I think back to some of our early webinars, both you and General Amadror in the days right after 10/7, were making the case that the focus of Israeli operations had to be eliminating Hamas. But we're seeing political pressure build to reach some sort of a hostage deal. So I guess can you give us a sense of where the strategic thinking is now on the trade-offs involved in reaching a deal, having a ceasefire versus keep on fighting? What would it take for Israel to agree to a deal?
It was published and announced by the defense minister, so I think we can speak about it freely. The operational principle applied right now is the same one that was applied at the beginning of the maneuver. And the idea is to continue to press and to finish the mission and to eliminate Hamas capabilities in the area of Khan Yunis, which is kind of a center of gravity for Hamas. And as far as we know, and we have to be very careful here, from our intelligence, some of their leadership is under the ground. What they have under Khan Yunis is few layers of tunnels. Some of them are 60 feet under the ground. Some of them are 100 feet under the ground. And they have kind of different layers where they are hiding. And we assume that it's not only them, it's also some of the hostages. We found clues and all type of evidence a few days ago in one of the tunnels, plus DNA and some other stuff. And we know that those tunnels were used to hold the hostages. Obviously, they were moved from there, but we know that they were using them. And that's why we have encircled the area of Khan Yunis. That's why we went also to the refugee camp, and then we went down to fight under the ground and to clear up the tunnel, is to do our best to find clues or hopefully to find the hostages. Definitely, we'll have to fight our way in order to rescue them, and it comes with a lot of pressure that we are trying to mount in all the other areas with the IDF. This is the basic idea. While doing that, I'm not as informed about that political element, about the negotiation, but it's quite clear that there are negotiations in few channels, the US channel, the Qataris channel, the Egyptian channels, and I'm sure that there are channels which we are not informed about. But it's another effort trying to do the best in order to rescue the hostages, which is part of the missions in this war.
We also heard reports over the weekend of growing disagreements within the war cabinet. And I think particular Gadi Eisenkot has made some public statements and interviews sort of suggesting that the strategy of destroying Hamas, in his view, might not be a realistic one. Can you give us any insights into those strategic debates?
It's a very diversified, I would say, cabinet, especially after General Eisenkot and General Gantz joined the cabinet. And that's why there are different voices. It's a great opportunity for every voice to be heard. And as Gadi published, he's very much supportive in terms of doing whatever it takes to rescue the hostages. And his understanding is that we will be able later on to finish the mission with Hamas. I think this is something that is really tough to discuss in this medium because we are not ill-informed about what are the conditions, if there are any suggestions, what is behind the scenes, what is psychological warfare. We know that that's exactly what Hamas is doing, but it's quite clear that the Israeli public is willing to do whatever it takes to save the hostages. Think about it, 111 days, elderly, women, children, babies are at the other side. We started with 240 and we still have there another 136 hostages. This is whom we are fighting with.
Thanks, General Eish. John, if I could pivot to you and reports this week of, an American and Arab, it almost sounded like a grand bargain. Not just a hostage deal, not just a ceasefire, but rolling normalization and Palestinian statehood and a whole lot of things into this big package. Do you have a sense of how this administration is thinking about where it's trying to steer this conflict and what it sees as the way out?
Well, thanks, Blaise. I do think this issue of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which the administration views as the major sort of geostrategic play to be made in the wake of this conflict in Gaza, is something that they are very, very focused on and believe that they can achieve, and that normalization with Saudi Arabia then is the key that in fact opens up integration between Israel and the much broader Arab and Muslim world and becomes really the nucleus, everything surrounding that deal, including a possible American security treaty with Saudi Arabia, including, as Jinsa has advocated, the possibility maybe of an American mutual defense pact, a more limited pact with Israel, that this becomes the nucleus of this kind of anti-Iran coalition that we've all thought about and have had hopes could eventually come into existence under American leadership between our strongest allies in the Middle East, Israel on the one side, and our strongest Sunni Arab partners on the other, who are at peace with Israel. So I think the administration sees that as a way to, as perhaps the best answer to what Iran and Hamas and the entire axis of resistance attempted to do on October 7th, to completely disrupt the region, to destabilize the region, to weaken America and Israel and its other friends in the Middle East, put them on the defensive. And through this kind of move on normalization, I think they really believe they can turn the tables on Iran in a very, very fundamental way that would be even an inflection point for the Middle East, as important as the Egypt-Israel peace treaty was back in 1979 in terms of the implications for the broader region, perhaps for years and even decades to come. The problem is they need to get past this Gaza problem that exists and I do think they believe that this hostage deal may give them the basis on which they can begin to get the region to move past the Gaza problem, that you can solve the problem of the hostages, which they think is critical. You can take the pause to get enormous humanitarian aid into the civilians in Gaza who are suffering, and you may be able to make things begin to happen on the Arab side in particular, that maybe begins to lead you toward the possibility of really winding down the conflict in Gaza, and then being able to focus the region on this big diplomatic play between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and then the wider region. So whether all that is possible is a big, big question mark. But based on conversations I've had, that's very much kind of the way the administration is thinking about where it wants to get to over the next several months. And the question of, can you get a significant pause in the most intense military operations now currently occurring in Gaza? If you can achieve that, you then begin to have something to work on toward that bigger diplomatic play that they're looking at.
Yes, let me ask you both. It seems to me that one of the sort of structural obstacles to overcome to a deal that has that format, John, of some prolonged ceasefire, pause in operations in exchange for releasing all the hostages is why would Hamas agree to it if there's going to be a resumption of fighting after some point in time and they've given up all their leverage, the hostages, and if it's going to require some sort of, Israeli withdrawal from Gaza or stopping of flying of drones and surveillance assets over Gaza, like the last pause in operations had. Why would Israel agree to it if it puts obstacles in the way to then resuming the fighting after the pause is over? So, I don't know. Is there a way to square that circle and get something that satisfies both Hamas's need not to get attacked and Israel's need to want to continue the operation afterwards? General Aish, any?
Basically, it's the million-dollar question. That's what the Israeli team is trying to solve via negotiation. On one hand, it's quite clear that we won't be able to go back to October 6th with the existence of Hamas as a military entity with its own capabilities on the other side of the border. Otherwise, I don't see how the residents of that region, which were uprooted from the region in October 7th, will be back to their houses, into their village or the city of Sderot. Oh, this is one question. On the other hand, it's quite clear that in order to be able to rescue the hostages, if it's going to be via negotiation, we will have to do some concessions. And so they are trying to find the golden path for that. And there is an asymmetry between our strategic goals here and Hamas. Hamas is trying to rescue itself and its leadership and some of its capabilities and its infrastructure, and to exist as a fighting power inside the Gaza Strip at the day after. And for that, they are negotiating and they are holding the hostages. And that's why we don't see any solution yet for that problem. The issue is to what extent our military pressure will be effective, and what we are going to achieve with that, and in what stage we'll be able to break the will of Hamas to fight and to resist, and not to give up the hostages. That's the big question.
John, if the U.S. is putting some 2-month or prolonged ceasefire on the table, how sincere do you think it is in offering that in the belief that Israel would be able to go back into operations in Gaza after it expires?
Well, I mean, I think the United States understands Israel's position, that Israel needs to be able to say that once this pause is done, once they get their hostages back, once they going to have to make some painful exchanges of Palestinian security prisoners in their prisons, they're going to have to send some of those people back. That Israel's going to have to say, we still need to continue this war. We need to get those communities rebuilt down along the Gaza border. We need to get those people back in their homes, and destroying Hamas and ending its ability to control people and resources and territory inside of Gaza. That has to come to an end. But again, my sense is that going to be enough once let's say 30 days or 60 days is up? You've had guns go silent in the Red Sea. You've had guns go silent against American forces in Iraq. You've had obviously quiet on the northern border between Israel and Hezbollah. And you've maybe got some movement diplomatically with the Saudis, who at least their public position is they want this war to be over. They want an end to the war. And on that basis, and a promise of a two-state solution, they're prepared to come in and do all kinds of things inside of Gaza to help rebuild it, to shape a new government in Gaza, and to do things with the Palestinian Authority to see that they're reformed and become a more acceptable partner in any two-state solution down the line, while at the same time normalizing relations with Israel. So in that condition, can Israel then, after 30 or 60 days of pause and quiet on all fronts across the Middle East, suddenly restart to say we've got to go and we've got to batter Hamas even further and put at risk some of the tactical achievements of whatever the calm has brought you, whatever progress it's made with the Saudis? I think that's the risk, that you create a political environment. A lot can happen in 30 or 60 days that makes it very, very difficult for Israel to continue doing what it has been doing, slower than it likes, with more difficulty maybe than originally foreseen, but making real achievements to kind of definitively put an end to Hamas's ability to threaten Israel again, and to lay the basis. Only by defeating Hamas are you really going to ever get to some possibility of a day after in Gaza, and the possibility of ever reunifying Gaza and the West Bank under a single authority that somewhere down the line may or may not be prepared to make peace with Israel. But unless you destroy Hamas, it's hard to see how you get there. So I, obviously have a bit of worry that of what lies ahead for any kind of hostage deal if it comes to fruition, in terms of Israel's ability to continue doing what I think needs to be done with regard to Hamas and the threat Hamas poses to Israel. But I totally understand, of course, that this may be the chance to get all of those poor, suffering people back to Israel after 111 days of suffering. And so it's a terrible, terrible dilemma that Israel faces. And I hope the United States can figure out a way to both get those people back and yet help Israel to continue doing the very, very difficult job that its military is doing on behalf of Israel, clearly, and Israel's citizens, but I think on behalf of the wider region, and certainly on behalf of the United States and our interests in long-term stability and security in that part of the world.
John, do you see any willingness or appetite by the United States to accept or formalize something like the security perimeter that General Eich was talking about as a condition for reaching a ceasefire, or trying to bring operations to winding down in some way?
It's a good question. I mean, this issue is now, maybe perhaps because of this tragic incident of the 21 soldiers this week, but the issue of Israel's security perimeter has kind of again begun to raise its head. American spokespersons are being asked about it. I think Secretary Blinken was asked about it, saying something to the effect of it may be okay as a temporary measure that Israel does this, but the United States remains firm on its original demand shortly after the war began that there cannot be any sort of long-term and permanent diminution in the territory of Gaza. And I think they mean not in any formal annexation legal sense, but that Gazans will be able to have access, Gazan civilians, to all places inside of the borders of Gaza. So I don't know what the actual U.S. position is on this question and where it goes. I do have a sense it could raise its head again in a more serious way, and I'll have to be a subject of serious discussions between the United States and Israel, because I think my reading is that this has been an Israeli kind of, I don't know if I would say red line, but a bottom line of what is going to be required for them to be able to bring their people and their citizens back to those communities near the Gaza border and convince them that they now have a real capability to live there permanently in peace and raise their families, that they need to have that kind of IDF presence and that kind of buffer zone, for whatever it is, a kilometer inside of throughout the Gaza perimeter.
Thanks, John. I have one more question for General Eich, and then I want to turn to audience questions. So as a reminder, if you have anything that you want to ask our panelists, feel free to submit it using the Q&A function in Zoom, and then I'll put the question to either General Eich or John. But General Eich, first, we just saw some reports that Israeli officials were here in Washington just yesterday, signing a new arms deal that would include F-15s, F-35s, Apache helicopters, and additional armaments. Is there anything more that you can tell us about the deal?
Obviously, in a war when we have attacked more than 30,000 targets in the last 111 days, the fact that we have consumed quite a lot of munitions is clear. You don't have to be too sophisticated to see it. And that's why General Zamir, who is the Director General, flew to the US to sign those deals and to expedite whatever we can. In that sense, there are many areas, many type of munitions that Israel is using and buying from the US, especially the precise guided munitions that allow us to be very accurate and very concise and to minimize collateral damage, even in such a devastating war scenario. By the way, not only in Gaza, but also in Lebanon and elsewhere. And that's why these are very critical munitions. And the fact that General Zamir is doing it in person in the Pentagon, PSCA, and meeting his colleagues is a proof of importance and I would say a certain level of urgency. And it deals not only with the current deals, but also with future deals relying on a very, very important element, which is the industrial military base and the industrial capacity of the US, which we are to a certain degree very much relying on. And this is a great opportunity to appreciate it and not to take it for granted.
And to that point also of the U.S. Defense Industrial Base, for those of you who didn't watch it earlier this week, we had a terrific webinar of Congressman Mike Gallagher in conversation with Ambassador Eric Edelman talking about some of the challenges that the U.S. Defense Industrial Base is going to face as it tries to equip not just itself and not just Israel, but also Ukraine and Taiwan and various U.S. partners around the world. So a very, very important and sobering conversation that I would commend to all of you. But we do have some questions from our audience that I wanted to turn to. First, from Mark Mandela's, what psychological strategies and tactics are used to encourage Hamas terrorists to surrender? General Aish, any insights that you can give us on that?
All type in different levels with different means. We call it information operation, which is really to allow us to communicate with the population when you want to mobilize, as an example, when you want to mobilize the population from the north part of Gaza to the southern part into the Mawasi area, you use those channels. Some of them can be seen as leaflets and text messages and calls that we do, and some of them are less publicized, but it is our way to communicate with the population for many reasons. The example that I was using was mainly for humanitarian purposes to make sure that those who are uninvolved can be moved from the fighting area. And for us, it's a very important effort to allow us later on to be very distinctive between those who are involved and uninvolved. And there are some other ways, by the way, which from obvious reasons I cannot elaborate on them. But in today's warfare, we can see it from both sides. We can see on the other hand how Hamas is using footage and videos of hostages and all type of atrocities that they did in order to demoralize, the Israeli side.
Thanks. We have two questions from Lieutenant General Sam Mundy, one of our Generals and Admirals Programs participants. Maybe let me start with this one. Excluding the Rafah challenge, what are the major challenges to getting humanitarian assistance into Gaza?
I think one of them was discussed is really to control that humanitarian supply and make sure it goes to the right people, to the innocent civilians who are living now in the Mawasi area and elsewhere, and not to Hamas, and obviously not to allow to Hamas to use it via UNRWA or directly to control the population. It's really a challenge because we don't have full control inside Gaza. I mentioned Rafah, where we don't have full control on other areas. The objectives that we have seized or cleared up or that we are active are very specified, and we are not deployed in all the area. So the idea and the effort is mainly to distinguish between the uninvolved, the civilian population, and Hamas that is not only using it for himself, to gain time under the ground, but also to gain a certain degree of control on the innocent population.
Blaise,
Thanks.
I would just add to that I think part of the problem, as I understand it as well, at Rafah is just simply the sheer crush of humanity that has now been pushed toward the Egyptian border. That is just overwhelming some of the infrastructure that is there in terms of whatever sewage, water, the whole 9 yards, and which is why there has been a fairly big emphasis from a lot of people, including on the U.S. side, for trying to figure out when it's militarily available to us, particularly in the northern part of Gaza. Once that's really been cleared, there's a real desire to try and figure out how you begin moving people off and away from that border in Rafah, both so Israel can do whatever it may need to do if there's a decision to do something militarily, but also just from a sheer humanitarian standpoint, it's a crushing weight on the system there inside of Gaza.
Let me just give you a few numbers, about humanitarian aid, to allow people to understand on what capacities we are talking. More than 10,000 trucks went into Gaza. More than 150,000 liters of fuel went into Gaza. Hamas struck 9 out of 10 electric lines, grid lines, coming from Israel into Gaza, because obviously we are still providing electricity into Gaza. Something like 60 or 70% from the electricity in Gaza is coming from Israel. Hamas hit 9 out of 10 lines. Israel is still providing more than 28 million liters of water a day into Gaza to allow drinking water, clean drinking water. I don't see many places where you are fighting your enemy and at the same time providing him what we are providing the Gazans. And to a certain degree, the question is very relevant. Some of it, quite a lot of it, is going also to Hamas.
Thanks both. One more question from General Mundy. What are the probable implications of an unfavorable International Criminal Justice Court ICJ court ruling on Israel's campaign in Gaza, with that preliminary ruling expected tomorrow? Would it have an effect on how Israel is fighting, General Eish?
I think the fact that we decided to appear in that court, and at the same time also to send such a prestigious judge from the Israeli Supreme Court to that institution is a very powerful message, that allows us to bring our voice and to be as clear as we can. At the same time, it's quite clear that when you are analyzing who is sitting there, who is manning that tribunal, it's quite clear it's a reflection of the UN. And when you're asking yourself about the UN General Assembly, if this is a reflection of the General Assembly, I'm not expecting any surprises. I'm not expecting them to surprise us and to be objective and to support us. Definitely, they are a general reflection of the policy of their countries. So I'm not holding my breath to hear what they have to say. And at the same time, I think it was very important to bring our voice to that court for the international community to hear what we have to say and what we have to present in that sense at that court.
John, do you think if the ICJ issues a ruling tomorrow that sort of calls for cessation of hostilities that would in any ways impact U.S. policy or tie the administration's hands? Certainly, on one hand, it has been relying on the ICJ's ruling on the Ukraine war and Russian aggression as one of the talking points that Russia has violated this ICJ ruling, calling for an end of hostilities. So would it be able to ignore it in Israel's case?
I think it would certainly, if they went that far and demanded, something operational from Israel to halt its self-defense operation. I think it would be obviously a huge travesty, and I think completely and utterly wrong-headed. I sincerely hope they don't do it. I think it obviously internationally would create just another headache, but I hope that the United States, as well as a fair number of our other allies around the world, would come out strongly as they came out in knocking down the original accusation by South Africa that Israel was committing, somehow violating the Genocide Convention here, and saying that was an absolute ridiculous, laughable charge that made a mockery of the Genocide Convention itself, and would have made a mockery of Israel's right to defend itself against the atrocities of what happened on October the 7th, and to eliminate that threat to its people. So I would hope, if we get that worst case outcome, that there is an extremely strong rejection and pushback by the United States, by Israel, and all of our other friends that in the Western liberal democratic world who actually really do care in a serious way about international order and stability, that they would mobilize themselves against this, because it's as often the case, Israel is kind of the maybe the canary in the coal mine for these kinds of efforts by international organizations to come after Western liberal democracies. But it won't be the last if this kind of thing is allowed to stand unopposed.
Well, General Ice, John Hanna, thank you very much for your insights today, particularly General Ice for staying up so late in Israel. Always look forward to and very much appreciate all the insights that you give us. Thank you to everyone who joined us for this webinar, and look forward to seeing everyone next week. Thank you, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Blaze. Thank you,
Thank you.
John. Good night.
Thanks.